What's up everyone, Ivan from Darkglass here, and today we're gonna take a look at where to place your EQ in your signal chain using the Darkglass Anagram. Now this is inspired by a question that came from a user and asking me what would I recommend and what is the best way to place your EQ in your signal chain. However, there is not really a best way. It really depends on what you want to achieve, and I want to demonstrate that in this video. If we take a look at my signal chain right now, active at the moment I only have an amp block and a cabinet, and that's it, and this is how that sounds like. Right, so it's a pretty solid clean tone, but there's nothing really special about it. Of course, I'm using a bit of EQ on the amp itself, but this is not what we're talking about today. We're talking about where to place, for example, your EQ blocks, like here on the amp EQ block. Now I'm going to turn it on, and right now if I go into the settings, there's no boost whatsoever. To make it very clear, we're going to focus here a bit more on the treble than on the bass, because it's easier to pick up the differences, especially if you're listening through your phone or a laptop or something like that, if we focus on the treble. And also I'm going to be using a pick to demonstrate as well. Now, as you could see previously, the EQ block was before the amplifier block and also before the cabinet block. Now I'm going to start adding high frequencies. I'm gonna go with a 5.5 dB boost. If I reset this, it's very clear what it's doing, right? It's adding definitely a bit more shine, more sparkle in the top area. So I'm going to do it again. If I bypass the EQ, so you can definitely hear the difference there. Now what I will do is, instead of placing the EQ before the amp, I'm going to place it after the cabinet block. And now let's listen to what that does to my tone. I'm going to engage it. Off. On. And now let's listen to the differences between after and before, because as you hear, putting it after the cabinet and boosting some high frequencies makes the treble a bit more forward, more apparent. You definitely notice it more. Now if I pull it back again, it is a bit subtle, not extreme, but there's definitely a difference. And of course, the more you boost, the more apparent it's going to get. So let's do also a high mid boost. I'm gonna use the 3 kHz setting and boost a bit of high mids here, maybe even boost a bit more treble. This is just to demonstrate, probably, you know, maybe might not use as high as an EQ boost as this one. Before the amp. It is a bit more forward, a bit more present, and If you boost too much, it might get a bit harsh depending on how you're playing, which technique you're using, but it's definitely much more clear what you're boosting when you put it after the amp. And a good way to think about this is that if you look at the signal chain flow, right? We're going from left to right. If you're putting an EQ after the amp, it's hitting the amp, it's hitting the input of the amp, then going to the cabinet. That is getting filtered by the sound of the cabinet, and then the frequencies come out. If we put it after the cabinet block, we're shaping the sound that's coming from the amp into the cabinet, and then we're doing a more, let's say, global shaping of the tone that's already passed through the cabinet and boosting that. If you have your amp, cabinet, and then put EQ there, you're shaping all the sound that's coming from the amp, the cabinet, and then shaping all of that. If you're putting the EQ before the amp, you're shaping what's going into the amplifier and then gets filtered out by the cabinet. And then what you hear is the result of that. To make it also a bit more interesting, you can of course place it after the amplifier, but before the cabinet. And if I was to bypass this, then engage it, but move it after the cabinet. It's definitely noticeable there. And this is all without using any other effects. Where it gets really interesting is when you start using drive or distortion, for example, which is why I have here the B3K distortion, the Microtunes B3K. Now I'm going to put the EQ again here before the drive, and I'm going to make it a bit milder first, not as high of a boost. And I'm going to first play without the distortion. And then engage it. It's really distorted. Probably I would not use the sound live, but if I bypass the EQ, and if I boost even more, let's say highs or high mids, as you can hear, this is really shaping how the distortion reacts to my playing, because we're feeding more signal of a particular frequency into the distortion that gets more distorted, and then we hear the result. If I was to swap positions, and then engage the EQ, you can hear there's definitely a difference. With the boost that I had after the distortion, it got pretty harsh. So probably I would not boost that much high frequencies and high mids placing it after the drive, but you can also place it after the cabinet with the drive. Again, here is also a pretty extreme boost. If I place it again here, in the middle, and of course I can then tame it down a bit more. As you can hear, putting the EQ after the drive and also after the amp requires less of a boost to make it audible, to make the difference really audible. I'm boosting here just 1.7 dB and 2 dB on the high mids and the highs. And if I bypass it, and that's a very clear difference in terms of top-end content. And this does not mean that you have to place it last and it is better, but like I demonstrated, you can use EQ also to pre-shape your distortion, which is really useful, and then even apply EQ afterwards, which is what would happen if you were to play live, for example, and the front of house engineer would EQ your signal, or if you were recording and then you would EQ the recorded track, which is what happens most of the time when you record music. EQ gets applied to your signal after you've recorded. Luckily, thanks to multi-effects units like the Anagram, we can recreate that process because it allows us to place EQ after a cabinet or even after other effects that would be really hard to recreate with physical devices, because you would need to mic your cabinet and then send it somewhere and then apply effects to that and then bring it back. It gets really complicated. Luckily here, it's just a matter of reorganizing blocks, which is done fairly quickly, so we can really experiment with our tone like this. Now I'm going to add a second EQ before the drive, just to demonstrate what we can do pre-shaping the drive as well. This time I grabbed the Darkglass 6-band EQ. It's flat. Now I'm going to just do it one more time, boost some upper mid-range. Reset. It's not as spunky, not as direct. So I can boost a little bit here, and maybe also let's cut a bit of 500. It's a bit less nasal if I cut here. Also, I can cut a bit of 250 maybe. And to compare without the EQ, engaging the EQ. So this could help us to cut through the mix a bit better, or to be a bit more present in the mix if we need to. We don't necessarily have to do it, of course, but pre-shaping the EQ is already a good way to, control your distortion a bit more if you need to. And then you can always apply some EQ afterwards as well. So let's say you want to compensate maybe because there's some loss of low end and you probably don't need as much of a high boost here. So let's go with this. Maybe you don't even need the high boost here. Bypass. And also I can move it after the cabinet. Bypass. As you could hear, you can definitely play around with where you're placing your EQ and also which frequencies you're boosting. And not only when you're playing clean, but also, as you could hear, using effects, especially such as distortion, where you can pre-shape the distortion or push certain frequencies to get more distortion out of those by using pre-EQ going into a drive. The bass reacts in a similar way. You can think of it as having low-end content going into your amplifier that then gets filtered by the cabinet if you place the EQ first in the chain, and the low end, if you place it afterwards, you're adding more bass content to the entire signal chain. So let's demonstrate that quickly. I'm going to grab this EQ and put it before my amp and bump up a bit here. If I move it after the amp, the cabinet, to boost a bit more just to make it more obvious. And if I place it before the amp, depending on how you're listening to this, the bass response might be a bit subtle, especially if you're listening to this with your phone or a laptop or a tablet. If you're listening to this with studio monitors, you probably can tell that the EQ or the bass boost after the cabinet, it's a bit tighter in the bass response, a bit punchier without being muddy. And it's even more noticeable at louder volumes. So if you're playing live through a loud PA, probably it's going to be even more noticeable because the lows are going into your amp, into the cabinet. They are getting filtered out by the cabinet's response, which usually acts as a high pass filter, and then you're boosting again. So you're having this interplay between the filtering of the cabinet and the boost in the low end. Whereas if you're EQing and boosting bass before, you're feeding more bass content into the amp and into the cabinet, and then you hear the result. With physical pedals, as I mentioned earlier, it's hard to do the first option of putting the EQ after your cabinet because it's really hard to make all the connections for that to happen. Usually that's front of house's job or when you're EQing a recording. But as I mentioned, having a multi-effects unit like this allows us really to experiment and try different setups and hear how those sound like, and also approach your tone more from a recording studio situation than if you were just playing bass. So it allows us to really morph and shape our tone to really fit into all the situations or genres that we want to. So go for it, experiment, find what you like best, and then use it for your playing. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked this video, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.